Hello, and welcome to this video in which I will talk about automated testing in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Not only is automated testing an invaluable tool to increase the quality of your software, if you are developing a product for AppSource, it is required that you also provide automated tests that cover the user scenarios in your AppSource submission. My name is Daniel Rimmelswan, and I am a partner with Cloud Ready Software, one of the ISV development centers who can help you with just about anything related to Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Our objectives for this video are as follows. First, I'll talk very briefly about what automated testing is and what it brings to your development process. I will also go over what you need to do specifically for your AppSource submission. Next, we'll look at how to configure the development environment that you will need to be able to do the development for your test app. Then, I will show you how to develop the actual test app. Our example will be a super simple example that covers a small part of the bookshelf app that we've developed in other videos. And then finally, I'll show you how you can actually run the test app using the standard test toolkit for Business Central in the test app that we've developed. Let's get started. Testing is an essential part of the software development process. Proper testing is an absolute requirement to be able to improve the quality of your software. Now, traditionally, testing is done by human beings. Developers take care of their unit tests and perhaps some wider coverage when they deliver a finished module. Then for larger development efforts, there may be a formal test team that covers system tests and regression tests. And if you are really well organized, testing is done with actual test scenarios, and testers record the outcome of their efforts each and every time that they run a test. However, since there are usually only humans involved, there will inevitably be inconsistencies in the way that tests are conducted. Additionally, there's always the matter of whether or not to conduct a full sweep of all test scenarios for every delivery. Often, the case will be that the only areas that are tested are the ones that are determined to be relevant for the current release. Why would you repeat the purchasing scenarios if you only made a change to the sales process, for instance? Automated testing brings a level of consistency and repeatability to testing that is impossible to achieve with just humans. And by using a tool that facilitates automated testing, you can run as many tests as many times as you want, with a guarantee that each and every test will run exactly the same way as the first time. And as a result, test outcomes become comparable to each other. You can actually prove that a change in the sales process will not affect the purchasing process. There's a lot more to automated testing that I can cover in a video like this, so let me just cover the very basics. The key to successful automated testing is that you can link test scenarios to user scenarios. In fact, it is recommended that you do so, even without knowing the design of the software, which is really not even relevant for conducting a test. You can define the success of a certain piece of software by measuring the actual outcome against the required outcome of a user scenario. In fact, once you start actually building test scenarios, you will soon discover that it's obvious to make your development process itself test-based. Writing proper tests at the start of the development process will give you clear and concrete requirements that the software has to meet. Repeatability of running test scenarios is another key ingredient of automated testing. Manual testing can be a very tedious task that can cause a human tester to lose focus, and added project pressure can add to the temptation for testers to skip the quote-unquote unimportant pieces of the test scenarios. How many times do you have to make sure that you can't enter a text string in a percentage field, for instance? Automated testing is a predefined set of instructions that always run, no matter what time, no matter how eager the project manager wants the result, no matter how hungry you are, the test scenario is defined and it will execute every instruction every time that the test runs. And it will run in exactly the same manner each and every time. You could spin up many sessions and simulate real load tests. You could potentially scale this up to hundreds or even thousands of users at the same time and really test the limits of your software's capabilities. Even within the largest organizations, this would never be possible in a manual test situation. Manual testing is great to prove that a new piece of software meets the requirements. But what is not always clear is whether a new change in the software has had any adverse effects on existing functionality in other areas. Automated testing provides the capability to prove that all test scenarios can still give you the same test results over time, whenever you make any change to any part of the software. Since you can schedule automated tests, you can run a full system test overnight. And when you come back at your desk in the next morning, you can look at the outcome of the latest test run and focus on just the ones that failed. The tests that are included in the standard Business Central Test Toolkit cover the entire application. You can run the full gamut of thousands of those tests in a matter of hours. So combined with a build script, you could automate the creation of a new tenant, implement your compiled app, run selected tests, and then evaluate the results in a fraction of the time that it would take a team of humans to do the same thing. Automated testing provides the capability to run a full test set every single day or multiple times a day. And if you have that capability, why not use it? You could organize your development process to include a daily build process and include a full sweep of the entire set of tests and almost guarantee 100% success when you are ready to deliver your software. With the recent tools that are available to us as Business Central developers, it has become a realistic goal to implement proper DevOps processes to your environment. This could be the topic of an entirely different set of videos, so I'm not going to go into meaningful details about that topic. If you choose a tool like VSTS, Visual Studio Team Services, which we totally recommend, continuous integration and delivery is absolutely an achievable goal. Whether you choose to go all the way and implement DevOps, you should definitely consider implementing automated testing in your development process. For those ISV and VAR partners that are working on AppSource apps, you will not have a choice in the matter. Automated testing is mandatory for your AppSource submission. The AppSource validation team will absolutely work with you to achieve that. So if you are having difficulties with your automated testing, you should reach out and ask for help. You may get some leniency in how much of the code you cover today. The stated requirements for AppSource is about 90% code coverage in your test app. But you must be working on a test app. You must have a plan in place to get to the required coverage. This video is intended for AppSource apps for Business Central, so I will stick mostly to the requirements as they relate to automated testing for the AppSource validation. For on-premises deployments, there are no requirements related to automated testing, but I think automated testing is something that every development team should use, regardless of the deployment target of your development. Your automated test scenario should cover what is specified in your user scenario document. The recommendation is to actually develop your user scenarios and your test scenarios as part of the same process. There should be a one-to-one relationship between the two. Now, when the validation team receives a new submission, they spin up a brand new BC Sandbox Docker container, which contains a regular Cronus demo company. Your app will be published and installed into this container, and as such, it needs to be possible to execute your user scenarios in the standard Cronus company. If you need to prepare any data that is necessary to successfully complete the user scenarios or the test scenarios, the creation of that data should be part of the installation process of your app and or your test app. And one important thing to include in your tests is the ability to run them in a non-super role. It should not be mandatory to have super rights in order to be able to use your app. So make sure that you include a test for non-super users. Moving on to our demo test app, we've put together a very simple test app that will run through the bookshelf functionality that we've developed in other videos. So we have 3 very basic tests. Remember, we've added the favorite book number to the customer table in a customer table extension, and we added that to the customer card page. And so we'll verify that the page has the field available. We've created a book list page, and so we'll verify that the page behaves as designed. And the same applies for the book card page. So let's move on to the next section, which is called Prepare the Test Environment. The architecture of a Business Central test app is very simple. The test logic itself is developed in a standalone app, and this app has a dependency on the app that we are testing. All you need is a brand new Docker container with Business Central and the original app file. The BC Sandbox container comes with the ability to include the standard Business Central test toolkit. You can install this into an existing container, and you can also include the test toolkit when deploying a new Docker container. I will show you how both of those options work. The test toolkit is a set of objects that enables automated testing. There's a user interface that manages the test runs and output where you can select which tests that you want to run, and it runs in a sandbox environment. Now you can also deploy the test toolkit in an on-premise situation into a regular NAV SQL Server database and run it from there. But what we are talking about is running the test toolkit from a sandbox environment for Business Central. The test toolkit includes code units that have test functions, and these test functions apply specifically to user scenarios. So this is testing functionality. Then there are also code units that have generic and app-specific functions that makes it easier to create these tests. So there are like generic kind of things like converting values and asserting errors and that sort of things. But there are also functions that create, for instance, a new item or a new customer. You can call these and reuse those types of scenarios for your tests specifically. And then finally, there are application objects to run the tests and evaluate the test output. So you can go in there, you can see the code coverage, you can see the result of a test, whether it's successful or failed. And all of those types of things you can evaluate and compare different test runs to each other. To prepare the test toolkit, if you have an existing container, you can run the import test toolkit to nav container commandlet. And the screenshot shows you what that looks like when you run this in a PowerShell prompt. This can be done from outside of a container, so you don't have to go into the container using the enter command. You can just run this from your desktop where your container lives. But the easy way is also to include it when creating a Docker container. And so there is a switch to the include test toolkit command option in the new nav container commandlet. And this is what I'm going to show you. So let's go to the VM and I will show you what that looks like and how that works. So I've switched to my local virtual machine, and on this virtual machine I have a single container installed called Bookshelf, which I created by running this script over here. The container is based on the BC Sandbox US image. I have my license on this VM, call it Bookshelf. I have a username and password, and these are the switches, the options that I used in my new nav container. Then I have a project workspace that is the Bookshelf app that we've created in all the other videos, part of the development course. And I have deployed this into the container. And when I run this in the container, it should show the book list where I've created a couple of books. And if I go into the customers list, and I open one of the customer cards, I have my favorite book number field available here, and I can select one of the books that I have created in my app. And so when I go into extension management, I can see that my Bookshelf app is created. So here's Cloud Ready Software, it's the Bookshelf app, and so everything in my, let's call this my development container, works as expected. So this is basically the baseline. And so the baseline is you have a container. This is where you do development. And because I have deployed this, it created a file called Cloud Ready Software _bookshelf.app. And that app file is going to be used as the dependency for the test container. And so the next step is to create a test container. And so let's call this Bookshelf test. Let's save this script. And also what I want to do is use the include test toolkit switch in this script. So let's save this and run this, and this should create another container, this one that includes the standard Business Central test toolkit. So when I run this, it should create it. I'm going to stop recording the video because this is going to take a few minutes, and so I'll start it back up when it's created. This part where you can see that the initialization of my container took a little bit more than 3 minutes. It's ready for connections, but because we have this include test toolkit switch turned on, it is now importing the objects from the test code units .fob into the container. And as you can see, it created a bookshelf test tool shortcut, which when the container is completed, I'll show you what that looks like. But it is still in the process of importing those objects. So it's going to import the objects, and then it's going to create the shortcuts for the Windows client and the C-side client, which we're not really going to use. But that's part of the test toolkit, is to create those objects into the container, and that's going to be the basis upon which the test app is going to be developed. So we have the original container. That's the development container. We don't technically need that, but I like to have one because, for these little tests, for these little kind of projects, it's nice to have an additional container. So if you're purely doing test development, all that you need is a copy of the actual original app file, and then you create a container that includes the test toolkit, and that should be all that you need. So I'm actually doing a little bit more than is necessary, but yeah. Okay, so now the nav container with the test toolkit has been created, and so I like to move the shortcuts around a little bit to make it easier for me to find everything. Hold on. And so this is the test tool. So when I double click that, it should open the Business Central client on the test toolkit page. So this is what that looks like. This is the CAL test tool. You can also find it in the search. And so all you do is search for test tool, and that should open up the test tool. And when you click on that guy, this is the page that opens. And so this is the entry point into the test toolkit in Business Central. That was it. This is all you need. And so now the environment that we need is set up. We have the development container that we technically don't really need, as long as we have the app file ready to go. And then the next part is the container that includes the test toolkit. By the way, you can also import the test toolkit into an existing container. You will not have this shortcut for the test tool, and in that case, you just open the Business Central and then you search for the test tool. It's really not all that difficult. So let's go back to the presentation, and we will move on to the next section. So now we have prepared our environment. We have created a new container that includes the test toolkit, and we have the original app file upon which we will create the test app. The next step is to start the development for the actual test app itself. A test app is nothing more than just another AL workspace, and so to get it started, all you need to do is run the ALGO command, select a folder, etc. You already know how to do this. Then what you need to do is specify the test target as a dependency. So now you need to create the dependency of the test app that points to the original app. And so for that, you need the app ID of the original app. You set this in app.json in the dependency area, and that needs, then you need the app's symbols file to make it work. Now, the app file itself will actually work as a symbol file, but what we found is the easiest way to get everything done properly is to just get rid of the packages folder, connect to your test app tenant, make sure that the app is deployed, and then you can just download the symbols from that container, and that puts everything in place that you need for developing the test app itself. And so you will also need to import the symbols for the test framework itself. And so for that, you have to set the test settings in the app.json file of the test app itself. So Visual Studio Code, the AL language extension, will know to download the test symbols by way of a setting in app.json that specifies that this is an actual test app. And so then when you hit the download symbols command, because that setting is turned on, it will know to also grab the symbols for the test toolkit. And that is another test to make sure that the test toolkit is actually installed in the tenant that you're developing on. And so you specify a minimum supported value, for instance, version 12, and then you hit download symbols, and this now includes the test toolkit object, and it will download the app, the application, the system, the test, and then, of course, the symbol files for the app that you're going to build as a test app. So for us, for the bookshelf test app examples, on the left-hand side, you see the dependencies setting of the app.json in our test app. And on the right-hand side, you see the packages folder that includes the application and the system symbol files that you will have in every other AL workspace, just like every other app. And in addition to that, because we set the test setting, it will also download the Microsoft_test symbol files. And as you can see, also the Cloud Ready Software Bookshelf app symbols are now also downloaded into the AL packages folder. So then moving on to the actual test, in order to link everything to your user scenarios, you have to come from a situation in which you have a list of features, a list of user scenarios, maybe work items in a work item system, but some way to link to the actual scenarios inside the code units. So the easiest way to accomplish that is to just create a test code unit for each scenario, and inside of that scenario that you can then use tags to describe the tests. In CAL code units, obviously you would put this in the comment section, but for AL, you can put comment lines anywhere in the object. So you set a feature tag with the name of the feature. The application area can be set for the whole code unit. And then for the scenario, this is where you can link to a work item if you use a work item system like Visual Studio Team Services. And then you have a short test description that contains a short description of the test itself. Then the tests themselves, also using tags, the easiest way is to just script them this way in a given, when, then format. So the given part describes the one step in setting up the test. The when describes the action under test, and then the then section is the verification. So given a certain situation, when something happens, then something else is the result of that test. And so this is where you program that test scenario in those three sections. How you do this is in code units, regular code units. And in the code units, you have the subtype we've already discussed in other videos. We have the install and upgrade subtypes, and another subtype is the test, and this makes it a test code unit. And then test procedures are decorated with a test attribute. So this is a regular function with a square bracket test attribute. Just like, for instance, the event subscribers, that was also with an attribute decoration in the procedure. OnRun is executed first, and then all the test procedures in there as well. So each test procedure is in a separate database transaction. Optionally, you can use the transaction model attribute, but just make sure you understand every test procedure is a separate database transaction. So if you have 3 test procedures, that's 3 database transactions. If you want to do 2 tests as part of one transaction, you should include those 2 tests in a single procedure. And so the outcome of such a test code unit, such a test procedure, is success or failure. So it's on or off. Failure is if any error is raised by the test code or the code that is tested itself. So, you can write test code that fails itself. That will result in failure. But you can also have failure in the code itself. And so if an error happens that you did not predict, that test fails. You can also have an error that you will predict, in which case you can actually program, I'm expecting this to result in an error, and that results in a successful test. So failure, like I said, is raised when any code errors out, and other test procedures will still continue. So if you have 5 test procedures in your code unit, the first one fails, it will just switch over to the next one, etc., etc. Extra features of the test toolkits are we can create test pages which mimic actual pages inside of a test code unit. And so this in test code unit is a data type. So you can create a test page which is based on an existing page, and then you can program against actions towards that page, and you can assert values and results from there. It's not an actual user interface on a client computer, so it's a simulation of a user interaction, but this object is based on an actual page object in your system. And then the last one is the UI handlers. The UI handlers handles user interactions. So we have things like message handler, confirm handler, string menu handler, etc. And these are all functions in code units that you can use to assert a certain result out of that process, and then you can compare that with actuals, and that's where you can determine success or failure of your test scenario. And then, of course, unhandled UI causes failure. And so if you have a UI action that you did not predict, that you did not program against, that will obviously result in a failed test. The assert error statement is important because if you predict a certain error and that error actually happens, that is a successful test. So there is code in there, that test code under success and failure conditions. You can use the assert error command to use to test under failure condition. And so it indicates that an error is expected, and a correctly predicted error will cause success output of the test. So you can program a test to make sure that the system properly errors out under certain conditions. All right, so those are the basics. This can get very complicated. This is a relatively short video. I don't think it's more than about a half an hour, 45 minutes. You can actually take classes to do test code units and that sort of stuff that take days to go into proper detail. And so I don't wish to trivialize the effort that goes into developing a test app. This can get quite complicated, but these are the basics. And so without further ado, let's go and create a test app. So back in my virtual machine, in my AL folder, I have something prepared that I'm calling the bookshelf demo test. And if I open that with Visual Studio Code, this opens the test app that we've created as an example. And so I still need to configure this thing. And so I didn't want to spend too much time in the video actually typing code and that sort of thing. So I thought it would be more beneficial to just show you what this looks like. And so this I've deleted the packages folder, so I need to connect to the container. This was called bookshelf test, and as soon as I save this, I can then go and download symbols. This should fail and ask me for my credentials. Yep, here it is. So this is Denstar. This is Denstar. It's not in the right window. So now I get an error message that says, could not download symbols. Please see the Visual Studio Code output log for more details. So let's take a look at that. Request for path failed with code not found, no published package. Okay, so as we can see, we have the application and the system and the test apps. So if I look at app.json, we can see over here that I have set the test attribute to the version that we have in our container. So in addition to the application and system, it did download the test symbols, but what we have not done yet is to actually deploy our bookshelf test. So I have a dependency on the bookshelf, and since we don't have that deployed yet, we have to do that. So this is an important part of doing this. So let's have a look at this script. In here, I have a number of steps to deploy the app file into the test container. And so this is the name of the test container, the bookshelf test. I have an app name called Bookshelf, right? That's the Bookshelf app that we've created here. That's this guy, Bookshelf, that's the name. And then the app file is in my AL Bookshelf demo file. So I can run this guy. Let's just run this. And this publishes and syncs and installs the app file, right? So publish prepares the app file for deployment. SyncNav container app puts the database, the schema changes in place, and install makes the app available inside of the tenant. And so that's the three-step process that you need to run through to actually publish and install a app into a container. So this should now work. And let's go back to our test app and let's run download symbols again. Now I have success. Symbols have been downloaded. And as you can see, I have my application, my system, my test, and my software, cloud-ready software bookshelf app as well. And so now I no longer have any problems. No problems have been detected in the workspace so far. And so I have the bookshelf test app in here as well. And let's take a look at the object itself. So I have a code unit, 50,140 bookshelf test. This is testing the feature bookshelf. Subtype equals test. Test permissions is disabled. And now I go and have a number of procedures. So I have a procedure here, test customer card favorite book number, which is a regular procedure that has an attribute test. So now the system knows that I have a test customer card favorite book number function, which is a test function that needs to be run inside of this test. And so I have a scenario, check favorite book number on customer card, given the customer card page using permission that do not include super. When the customer card is open, and that is programming customer card test page dot open view, and that's the variable here, right? So this is a test page variable based on the customer card that I'm going to open. And then we assert whether the favorite book field is visible, right? That's the test. The favorite book must be visible. And so these are the tests. So this is a book list handler where we have the customer card test page in here. We look up the favorite book, customer card test page, test book list page. Check if book list is open from field favorite book number and if book card page is open for new record. Given the customer card page, look up favorite book using permissions. That's the same command library, lower permissions. That is a code unit that is part of the test symbols. So we now know that that works, right? It's looking that up into the test symbols. When the customer card is opened, then the book card opens caught by book card page handler. Now we have a book card page handler here. That's the function, and that does that. This is basically it. This code unit has a number of very rudimentary tests. You can actually go into the C-side container and take a look at the existing tests. There is a ton of information that you can find in here to see how Microsoft has put together their test scenarios, and you can do your development based on those test scenarios and kind of steal the way that they do it. You can browse through the libraries, you can browse through the functions that are available for you to use, like creating items, creating customers, creating documents, and that sort of thing. That might be very useful to be part of your system. So if you have, for instance, a requisition system as an app, and you want to create a sales order based on some information that you collect, you can still see if the, creating that is done right in your test app. So I'm rambling a little bit, but let's go back to the presentation, to the next section called running the test application. In the final section, I'll show you how to run the test application itself. The steps to run the test app are very straightforward. First, you publish the test app. From Visual Studio, that works just as any other app. You hit F5 or Control F5 to create the app and publish it to your target container. Of course, you can also create a new container and publish the test app with PowerShell just like any other app. And so for that to succeed, of course, you have to create a container that includes the test toolkit, or import the test toolkit into an existing container in order for you to be able to do all those. Then from Business Central, you open the test toolkit. If you know how to do the query with a page number, you can use page 130401, but you can also just go into search and search for test tool. I'll show you how that works in a minute. Then from the test toolkit, you run the get test code units function to populate the list of tests. Now you can run get all code units, or you can select. We're going to just select the test code unit that we've created, and then we can run all tests or run the selected tests from there as well. And then you can run that and see the result of those tests. So let's go back into the virtual machine and see what that looks like. So this is our test app, and from here we just deploy it by hitting Control F5, and that publishes our test app into the Bookshelf test container, and from there we'll look for the test toolkit. From Business Central, we then go to search, and we'll search for test tool, and that opens the test toolkit. We've seen this briefly before. This is the test toolkit. You can get to test code units to populate this list. In here, you can select all test code units. This will import, I think, about 15,000 test code units that you can run. For our purposes, we don't need everything, so we're going to just select test code units. And as you can see, our Bookshelf test is a test code unit, and it knows about it. So let's select this guy, hit OK, and that populates our test in this screen. And then we can say, I want to run this. You can select or unselect it. Of course, we want to run everything. Here are the functions in there. So as you can see, we have test customer card favorite book number, and we have the test book list page function as part of that test code unit. So now we can select run active code unit. Let's say all, and then we hit OK, and that should then run the test code units. So this ran in 13 seconds and 337 milliseconds. So this is just an example of how to run these. And obviously you can see the result of the test code unit. In our case, all three are marked as success. So our test code unit works, and it resulted in the result that we predicted. So you can run this, you can automate this. There's even capabilities of including a test run in a build script inside of Visual Studio Team Services. So you can do a periodic build every day, for instance, every week, whatever you choose. You can even set up the Visual Studio Team Services to react to people committing their object changes into the system, which can then trigger a build process, and that build process would then, for instance, create a container, deploy the app, then deploy the test app, and then automatically run all of the test code units. And so you can make this part of a deployment routine and include this in your build process. That's really it. This brings us to the end of this video about automated testing. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope that you found it useful to get an introduction on how to get automated testing started. It's now up to you to make it happen for your own app. To learn more, please visit the link on your screen, and all that's left for me is to wish you a very nice rest of your day.